Hi there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Tamara and I'm a brand strategist and writer living in London. Today I'm so excited to be kickstarting a new series on my channel where I analyze brands and brand transformations, diving deep into the business decisions, the strategy, and the creative behind them. The first brand I want to talk about is actually one I'd never really given much thought to before, and that is Dunkin' Donuts. A couple of weeks ago I was watching the Super Bowl ad compilations and saw this hilarious spot of Ben Affleck manning a Dunkin' Donuts in Massachusetts.
What are you doing here?
Here's me, find my
Is this
friends.
what you do when you say you're going to work all day?
I gotta go, guys.
Grab me a glaze.
And when I clicked off, I was really surprised at how many views it had gotten, not only on the YouTube video itself, but also in terms of the press it had earned. It actually turns out that Dunkin' Donuts is one of the best performing brands on social media, specifically TikTok, and really gained in popularity during the 2020 pandemic. This surprised me because I'd never really thought of Dunkin' Donuts as a super cool or interesting brand. My very few interactions with it had been going down to Florida on road trips, and we would stop at Dunkin' Donuts in the middle of the night or in the mornings for a quick pit stop next to a gas station, something like that. And I remember the fluorescent lights and very much no frills feel of the joint. And they've always really leaned into this. Since it was founded in the 1950s, Dunkin' Donuts has been a quintessentially New England coffee chain serving up affordable coffee to the New England working class. So this got me thinking, how did a brand that was so associated with working class New England do so well, specifically on TikTok with Gen Z, a generation that is notoriously difficult for brands to really tap into? It turns out that a massive rebrand in 2019 had a lot to do with it. The brand really changed a lot. It was part of a much bigger transformation where they changed their name, their stores, as well as their overall experience. But somehow they stayed true to their working class roots and didn't alienate their diehards while still being able to tap into this completely new market of Gen Z. So in this video, let's talk about how and what their rebrand had to do with this. So to understand the unique nature of the Dunkin' Donuts brand, we really have to go back to the beginning. The company was founded in the early 1950s by William Rosenberg, who was working in the Boston shipyards during World War II. While he was there, he recognized that the workers needed a good and affordable place to eat, so he actually started an industrial catering company that then moved into a permanent location, which wasn't called Dunkin' Donuts yet, but eventually took on the name because he noticed that people would dunk their donuts into their coffee. While this was far from being the first of its kind, remember, we're thinking of the early 1950s in America, where you have chains like McDonald's popping up. They really were able to differentiate themselves by following trends. Specifically, there was an ice cream shop that introduced 28 flavors of ice cream, and William, the founder, decided to introduce 52 flavors of donuts, which now seems like a bit of a random fact, but this goes to show that from the beginning, they were fast followers and really willing to keep up with trends. The brand was aimed at blue-collar workers from the get-go and really represented the values of New England culture, like hard work and honor and pride. There's a pretty deep link between Dunkin' Donuts and Bostonian culture, which has been explored in pop culture like in SNL. I'll put in a clip here.
I love Dunkin', guy. What are you talking about? You want to talk real customers? Kid, that's me. I'm like the mayor of Dunkin'. This is the face of Dunkin' Donuts right here.
They really continued to lean into this working class brand over the years, doing product placements in shows like The Simpsons, where we can all associate the classic pink and sprinkled donuts, specifically doing a product placement where Homer is at work, so again, the industrial feel. And then also they've worked with shows like The Wire, which is all about the police force. And there's very much a link in American pop culture between donuts and Dunkin' Donuts and the police force. We even see this blue collarness all the way to its product naming. So if you look at their biggest size of filter coffee, it's called a box of Joe, which is linked to the very casual expression, a cup of Joe. And this is miles away from Starbucks' very complicated approach to naming.
Venti is 20.
Danny.
Yeah. Large is large. In fact, tall is large, and grande is Spanish for large. Venti's the only one that doesn't mean large. It's also the only one that's Italian. Congratulations, you're stupid in 3 languages.
Sticking to their roots, over the past 7 years, Dunkin' Donuts has expanded pretty quickly over Northeast America and recently have started to really push for international expansion as well as more on the West Coast of the US. And they're interesting in that they've always stuck to a franchise-only model, which means that they don't own any of the real estate and they only have franchise agreements. Why this is interesting for this specific analysis? Well, companies that are franchise-only will typically have their biggest asset on their balance sheet be the brand, so it's critical that they keep up that brand equity by doing things like a refresh to make sure it stays relevant. While they did grow quite quickly, they were outpaced very early on by competitors like McDonald's, and then in the next couple of years, Starbucks, which really put them in a bit of a hard spot come the early 2000s. Additionally, there was a bigger shift in mentality towards healthier eating, and so donuts for breakfast was no longer something people really wanted, which was difficult because that's what their entire brand was all about. Their solution to these pressures, along with a lot of their competitors, was a focus on drinks. In the past few years, drinks have actually become one of the fastest growing and highest grossing products in fast food, specifically because there's very little labor and storage costs associated with them. And actually, a broader focus on drinks is interesting because it offers a fix to the classic midday sales slump problem that a lot of breakfast-oriented restaurants will experience. Mainly, people will go for their coffee in the morning and then maybe for something at the end of the day on their way home from work, but what are they going to do in the midday? Well, having a broader selection of drinks really allows people to go back to the store for that. And Dunkin' Donuts has tried to fix this in other ways throughout the years. Dunkin' Brands, the holding company of Dunkin' Donuts, also owns Baskin-Robbins, which is an ice cream company in the US, and they will open these joint restaurants where you'll have a Dunkin' Donuts as well as a Baskin-Robbins in order for people to come in for an afternoon snack of ice cream. However, again, ice cream is not super healthy, just as donuts are not super healthy, so drinks was a perfect solution. In 2003, they started to really invest in drinks as well as introduce specialty coffee. They even introduced a new tagline in 2011, which was "America runs on Dunkin'," and this did a couple of things. One, it introduced Dunkin' without donuts for the first time, which really showed a shift away from the sweet pastry. And two, it brought in this idea of beverage as fuel, which was a nice nod to the working class origins and almost had this industrial feel. And it actually worked. By 2011, they were outselling every one of their competitors, including Starbucks, for a cup of coffee, which really helped boost sales during the 2008 depression, where people were still willing to pay for small luxuries like a cup of coffee in the morning before work. But this revenue performance and new tagline didn't really translate to their brand, which still felt confused and not as clear as their competitors' offerings. You had McDonald's, which had this global reach and this incredible esteem, and then you had Starbucks, which is premium and at the time had this amazing millennial brand craze. People were obsessed with it, would buy Starbucks just to walk around with the logo in their hands. And actually, whenever they tried to do anything to improve their brand experience, like introduce music or better lighting or better furniture, they were met with a lot of pushback from their diehard New England customers who had been with them forever. An example I particularly like is when they tried to introduce a panini on the menu, and this was met with a lot of pushback, people saying it was too fancy, and so they had to rename it to a stuffed melt. So Dunkin' Donuts was really at this crossroads. On one hand, they wanted to stay relevant and improve their brand experience, but also they didn't want to alienate their die-hard customer base. Not to mention, a lot of people just saw them as a cheaper Starbucks copycat, and so they needed to find a way to differentiate while still staying true to who they were. So enter a new stage for the business. In 2016, they brought in new CEO, David Hoffman, who introduced a blueprint for growth, which was part of this big strategic initiative for the company. And the goal of this was to unlock healthy growth and modernize the brand for the next generation consumer. And whether or not the executives knew it at the time, because I'm trying to put myself back into 2016, and I think we were all still talking about millennials, but that next generation consumer was going to be the Gen Z, and they were going to effectively tap into that new market. Specifically, this blueprint for growth consisted of a $100 million cash injection into the business. This was the first time Dunkin' Donuts ever contributed significant capital alongside their franchisees. And this cash injection was meant to do 4 things. One, it was going to introduce the next generation store design, which was focused on digital transformation, mobile store ordering, as well as a more personable and friendly in-store experience. So they introduced these taps where you could get some nitro cold brew or just some different offerings, and very much like in a bar, you could talk to the barista while they did this for you. And actually, when they did this 2018-2019 investment, they did their mobile app. They had a specific lane in their new stores where people could do online pickups. There was more areas for online pickups within the stores. They didn't know it yet, but this positioned the brand perfectly when the 2020 pandemic came, because they were able to have all of this infrastructure that was needed for social distancing and when everything else was closed. With this cash injection, they also reintroduced their espresso and specialty coffee platform with new recipes, training, new machines, and they actually went beyond coffee, offering a broad range of specialty drinks like matcha lattes and boba. They also accelerated the sustainable transition from foam to double-walled paper cups. And as we know, they also introduced their new brand identity, which included their name, their messaging, their visual system, etc. So let's talk about it. Probably the most noticeable aspect of the rebrand was their shift in name from Dunkin' Donuts to Dunkin'. And this really represented their strategic shift away from donuts and into a broader drinks and food offerings, like their new vegan breakfast sandwiches, for example. And this isn't exactly new. Starbucks did a very similar thing in 2011 when they rebranded, going from Starbucks coffee to just Starbucks in order to be more relevant in non-coffee drinking markets, as well as to push towards a broader food offering. I think going the Dunkin' route was actually smart on behalf of Dunkin' Donuts. A lot of people call them DD, which is their consumer appointed nickname, if you will. But Dunkin' does a lot of great things. One, it's the abbreviation of the word dunking, which really plays back to the working class, very casual, unpretentious roots of the name. It also is associated with the name of the man, like the man's name, Duncan, which brings it a really personable and friendly feel. You can't help but have an emotional connection to a brand whose name is a person's name. Finally, it is a verb, which is super active, and I think that really plays into the bold energy they're bringing with the brand. Looking at the broader visual identity, a couple of words come to mind. It's fun, it's bright, it's playful, it's super unpretentious. And according to their CMO, Tony Wiseman, this was really meant to highlight the optimism and joy of the brand. The first thing you notice are the colors, which haven't actually changed much since 1973. They had their initial colors of maroon and yellow back in the 1950s, and the pink was introduced very early on in the brand's history in the 1960s, and the yellow in the 1970s, about a decade afterwards. Having remained unchanged for a very long time, as well as if you think about how bright and noticeable these colors are, Dunkin' Donuts is certainly one of the most recognizable brands in its category. There's also the logo, which was stripped down, so they remove obviously the donuts part of the name, but also the icon of the coffee cup that was initially on the left of the typeface. And what they've cleverly done is highlighted that apostrophe I was talking about earlier at the end. So they have Dunkin' in orange and then the little pink apostrophe, which really highlights the active nature of the name. As part of the broader visual system, they've also introduced a couple of icons, as well as a monogram, which I personally like. It reminds me of the Burberry monogram, like the new TB check, which obviously is my initials, but also is really pretty, so I really like that personally. Finally, if you look at the packaging, they've kept it really light and friendly and unpretentious. Something I particularly like on the official shots of the packaging is they've actually included some coffee drips, as you would normally see on any used coffee cup, but this really shows that Dunkin' cups are meant to be used out in the world, going to and from work, on the factory floor, going on adventures, etc. So it's a really nice nod to the overall brand. They've also updated their language to go along with the friendly and playful brand. One thing's for sure, they don't take themselves too seriously, whether they're introducing avocado toast or boba or oat milk lattes. They might not be innovators, often copying broader trends introduced by Starbucks or bigger coffee chains, but actually they're making these small luxuries really accessible to the general American public. It's this good-natured playfulness and willingness to adapt that has really served them well as they've exploded on TikTok and other social media. They actually by far have the most followers on TikTok compared to Starbucks or McDonald's. Most of their success on TikTok comes from a brand partnership with Charli D'Amelio. The influencer, who's one of the biggest creators on the platform and also one of the first, is from New England, specifically Connecticut, and also loves Dunkin' Donuts and is a devout fan. And someone very smart on the Dunkin' social media team noticed this and offered her both a brand partnership as well as her custom drink. So they introduced the Charli, which was a cold brew of some sort, and that really exploded exploded sales as well as engagement on the platform. Dunkin continues to thrive on TikTok today with really relatable content and tons of engagement with their fans. This relatability also extends to their more traditional ads as well, bringing us back to that Super Bowl ad with Ben Affleck I discussed in the beginning. But why would an unpretentious and playful coffee chain hire a Hollywood actor worth millions of dollars? Well, it turns out that Ben Affleck is a born and bred Bostonian who absolutely loves the chain, and we all saw during the pandemic those paparazzi shots of him going out and getting his Dunkin' Donuts every morning. His partnership with the brand feels authentic because it is, and in that ad we see him really playing up this Bostonian New England accent.
Should I be in it, or do you want to just use the self-portrait?
And the gruffiness and hardworkingness of, yeah, a super successful actor manning a coffee shop. And I really think that it's this authenticity that has made the brand so successful with different customer bases through the years. At the end of the day, the rebrand was met with skepticism. Was Dunkin' just trying to be a cheaper version of Starbucks? I'd argue no, at least not from a brand perspective. While they might raise their prices or introduce fancier coffee offerings, nothing about their colors, their voice, their identity, their vibe feels premium. At least not in the way that opening a premium coffee roastery in Milan, like Starbucks did a few years ago, feels premium. Specifically, they're trying to associate the classic Italian roastery with this brand from Oregon, which, if we're being honest, feels a little bit inauthentic. Sure, Dunkin' is offering these more premium or fancy offerings that go beyond your simple cup of joe, but this isn't about being premium. It's about taking these small luxuries of the matcha lattes and the cold brew and making them accessible and available to everyone at an affordable price. And you know, this kind of brings us back to the 1950s, where the founder, William Rosenberg, just really wanted to offer a nice midday break to the shipyard workers in Boston. So this is what sets Dunkin' apart. It's their personality, their willingness to not take themselves too seriously, the authenticity of the brand that they bring across every single touch point, whether it's their Super Bowl ads, their TikTok, their identity, everything. And Gen Z, who are hit with so many messages on a daily basis, really crave this authenticity. A lot of them have had tablets or computers since they were very young, and they can call out bullshit from brands. They see it a mile away. And so seeing a brand like Dunkin' that has this true authenticity is probably a breath of fresh air. And so it's with this authenticity that Dunkin' has been able to both tap into this new customer segment while also not alienating their diehard fans of the Bostonians and New England working class. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this analysis of a classic American brand. I know I really enjoyed making it, and it was really fun to learn more about Dunkin'. I'd never really given it much thought before. If there are any brands or brand transformations you'd like me to take a look at, definitely pop them in the comments down below. In the meantime, if you want to learn more about brand strategy or working as a creative professional, definitely subscribe or check out my other videos. I'm trying to post every week, and I'm super excited to be making content again. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you next week. Okay, cheers. Bye.